It's good. It's all set. Yeah. Okay, Catherine, we will put that. We'll put all of that. Yes, Paula, Lisa, Catherine. We'll put that in the metta bowl. Thank you. And okay. And for anyone who might not know, that metta means love and kindness. That's the sort of traditional translation for it. Although it can also mean a deep friendliness, sort of the bodhisattva friendliness. It's related to mitta, the Pali word for mitta, which is friend. All right, so I'm going to do a bit of chanting. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Our topic for this weekend is sense experience. And I'm primarily going to be sharing from a sutta from the Middle Length Discourses, sutta number 137. There will be a handout tomorrow with an outline of the sutta, because there's quite a bit of information packed in there. We won't do the whole thing, but we'll do most of it. And but for tonight, rather than give you the handout, I thought that I just want to give a bit of an overview of how the senses are introduced in the sutta, and then we can talk about then what, once you have tuned into that experience, what is a skillful way to practice with that. But for now, I want to just speak about this description. We don't have a lot of backstory in the sutta. The Buddha just starts out by saying, I'm going to give you an analysis of the six sense fields. So we don't know what prompted this in particular. But this word fields can also be translated as bases or domains. And it also means something like source. But I like to use the word fields because I think that we can relate to that in English fairly easily. So if I say your visual field, then you know what that means. That's what's called the eye sense field, is the visual field. Okay? So the Buddha speaks of them as the internal sense fields are eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Not brain, but mind. Right? And it means the literal organs to some extent. The organs have to be functioning in order to receive some sensation from those things. But it also means, again, the sort of possibility of receiving sensation in a broader way through that sense gate or sense field. And so that's particularly important when we think about the mind as a sense organ, as a sense field. And we're going to, the Buddha is going to speak a little bit more about what he means about that and how that shows up toward the end of the sutta. So I'm going to save some of that for dessert. But for now, just to say that those are the internal sense fields. And then the external sense fields are the things that are the objects of those. Yeah. So in the case of the eye, for example, like physical things that we can see or light that we can see, those are the external eye field. Yeah. And so right away, it's a kind of interesting statement about how we define what's internal and external, because the commentary says, well, the difference between the two is how attached you are to them, not whether it ends at your skin or not. You see that? But the degree of holding on, the degree of importance actually that you are attributing to that thing. So it's already starting to stretch our idea a bit about the sense of separation between this thing and the greater environment. And so you have the internal sense fields and you have the external sense fields, which we often refer to as the objects of those internal ones. And those two things together are said to be the all in the Sabbhe Sutta. So you should know also that the six sense bases is a very interesting teaching that is one often associated with the nuns, with the bhikkhunis in the early Buddhist teachings. And it also is part of the connected discourses. There's a whole chapter with dozens and dozens of suttas about this framework. So it's really up there in importance with the five aggregates, for example, or different sorts of frameworks that the Buddha gave for how to relate to our experience through different lenses as a way to train the ability to, again, see what's present in ways that you might not already be seeing. But when he says that that's the all, it means the all of our experience. In fact, in Majjhima Nikaya 1, in the first middle length discourse, which is said to be the most difficult of all of them, in other words, from this same book as the one about the sense basis, the Buddha says very clearly, do not think that you are the all. That is a mistake. One who thinks like that is actually mistaken. He says that that's one of the false views. And that one who actually understands properly wouldn't make that statement, because you could say the impermanence of the things is actually of greater importance than that whole, that way that they're connected. So I'll go on, and then this will all start to make sense. So the next part of the scheme, after the Buddha says, okay, these are the internal sense fields, those are the external sense fields, that's the whole of your experience. And then he talks about this 6 types of consciousness. Yeah, 6 types of consciousness. So he speaks about a type of consciousness associated with each one of the sense fields. And that might seem kind of odd, because we're like, well, wait, consciousness is this thing that seems like it's always around. Right? But so the consciousness is described usually in 2 ways in the suttas. One is as a stream of consciousness, this thing which appears to flow. And the other is as individual moments. And so both things are true. Right? Just like when I was a kid in high school, we said, what is light? Is light a wave or is it a particle? You were supposed to say, yes, it is a wave, it is a particle. It's both of those. And consciousness is like that. That's how it's being related to here. So when the Buddha speaks about in a particular type of consciousness associated with a sense field, he's looking at it he's describing it from the perspective of particle. Yeah. So I have it used to be a ball, you guys. This is, it's kind of gotten old and misshapen now. I don't know how long I've had this, but this is my one and only prop that I use for Dharma talks. Some of you have seen it before. And this is the way that I like to describe contact. So contact is a very technical term in early Buddhist suttas, and it means when there is a sense organ, so let's say this is your eye, and there is the corresponding object, so it makes some light, and those two come together, and there is enough consciousness that can engage with that. So that's a whole other sutta. We're not going to get into that. But if you're curious, larger footprint of the larger sutra of the elephant's footprint. Then those can come together and they create a moment of contact, which has a distinct beginning, middle, and end, and a moment of consciousness within that contact. So this is an example of an eye consciousness, right? So again, the light hits your eye. It's not pizza pie, it's contact. Right? That's what's happening. And that creates a particular kind of consciousness. And the consciousness is different depending on which gate it came in, which door it came in. So what does that mean? It means like the taste of the flower is different than the smell of the flower. Right? The taste of the flower is different than the sight of the flower. The idea of flower in your mind, the thought of flower is different than the smell of the flower. Those all have a different effect on consciousness. So when we can begin to experience this in some detail, then we can begin to better understand the role of consciousness in each moment of experience. And one way that you might have experienced that just kind of intuitively is when we did the meditation and you switch to attending to the mind, to the mental activity. But what do you see when you attend to the mental activity? Well, you also still see this itch on your knee or something that you heard, right? All of those sensations that you were feeling that when you were attending to the other sense gates are also in the mind. The mind has a role in being able to know that. That's what we mean by knowing, in fact, that it has impacted the consciousness in some way. So this kind of experience, getting down to slowing down enough and getting down to a kind of precision about this kind of experience can help us to begin to see the role of different aspects of the body, the mind, the non-separation that's happening there, that various impacts, and particularly, I mentioned during the meditation, the feeling tones. So feeling tones are set to rise with every single contact. Anytime we have a contact, we have this kind of gut feeling that it's okay, or it's not okay, or it's somewhere in the middle and we can't really tell. Pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And so those feeling tones are like little flags for us, little red flags. If you can see the feeling tone, it means that you're very close to the contact. You're very close to being able to observe the consciousness in and of itself. Not the unpleasant or pleasant flavor of it, but the consciousness itself, the knowing itself. But typically what happens is that we have these feeling tones, and those feeling tones push and pull us in a particular direction, and so we have emotions about that. So when we talk about a feeling tone, it doesn't mean an emotion like sad or happy or hate or love. Those are actually more complex phenomena. Feeling tone is quite primitive, very very simple. But those other complex phenomena are usually built on as a response, we could say, to the feeling tone itself. And so knowing that we can begin to do a little bit more study, begin to see the push-pull there, begin to have more of a choice actually about the responsiveness to those sense impressions or not. One story that I like to tell about that is story about the little boy and the ice cream. So when my daughter was little, so my daughter's 33 now, that was a long time ago, and she's having her third birthday party, I believe, and I said it would be really great to do it at the preschool because it's easy. All the kids are already there. Somebody else will clean up. Great, let's do it that way. So I got off work at lunchtime and ran over to the ice cream store, bought each kid a little ice cream and bought a bag of sprinkles to put on top. And the kids were all lined up at the table. The teacher knew I was coming, the preschool teacher, and had the kids all seated at the table. And Kayla was at one of the long rectangular table. Kayla was at one end, and her hugging buddy, this I sadly don't remember this little boy's name, was seated at the opposite end of the table, the other side of the rectangle. And so I got in there and I started putting ice creams down right away because Florida, it's melting, right? And it's time for a party. So I started putting ice creams down, and I put an ice cream down in front of Hugging Buddy, and the preschool teacher came over and said, no, and snatched it away because he's lactose intolerant. Can't eat ice cream. Can't eat ice cream. And the little guy was really upset. He started crying quite loudly. Everybody was very upset, which makes sense, right? One moment he had an ice cream, and then the next moment he didn't have an ice cream. And he was too little, apparently, at that point in his life, to understand that the ice cream was harmful, that there's a good reason why it's been taken from him. So what does that mean? It means he still has a positive Vedana toward that thing. He sees the ice cream, and it brings up a pleasant feeling tone for him, and this wanting the ice cream, right? Even though it would have been harmful, even though it's inaccurate, that's still what's happening in his heart and mind. And because he's little, he gets swept away by that. We also, adults also get swept away by that. Yeah. So to finish out the story a little bit, the preschool teacher and I looked at each other and said, well, now what? Now what are we going to do? And so she said, well, we have these giant cookies that we usually only give the kids like half of one of these cookies or a quarter of these cookies because they're huge. So maybe I just give him a cookie because he likes those cookies. So I said, great. So she brings a cookie. Nothing, not having any of it. Little Hugging Buddy is upset. He just continues crying. By now, all the other kids are eating ice cream, which is making him cry even harder, right? And she looks at me and she said, another cookie? Well, I guess that's the only choice we have. So she goes and she brings another cookie like the size of his face. Like these are giant cookies. And she puts down the cookie and put a second cookie in front of him. And I could see him look. He's still crying, but he looks down at the cookies and he makes the choice. He knows that he has to make the choice. To let go of his dukkha or not. That is the choice in front of him. Whether or not he knows what that means, because he doesn't, right? He's little. But he sees and he makes the choice. And he picks up the cookie and he starts eating his cookie. And he stops crying. So in that moment, little hugging buddy made the wise choice. He made the choice to let go of his dukkha and to not be so swept away by that previous feeling tone, but to allow a new feeling tone to be known, a new sense opportunity to be known. So this is part of what we're going to explore. What is it to be present for this sense experience of this moment? What is it to find our ability to choose, to respond to what's already come up? When we find ourselves swept away, then what do we do? And how do we care for that place? Because when you look and you observe in your mind, and hopefully this will also be something you can consider when you reflect back, not necessarily while you're sitting, but when you reflect back on your sitting, what you see is that perhaps you are landing on different parts of the experience. And by that I mean, one moment you might be feeling a feeling of sadness, and the next moment you might be actually feeling some part of your body. And the next moment you might be observing that feeling tone. Oh, it's pleasant, it's unpleasant, whatever it is. So you're landing on different parts of the experience. Or you might, as I said during meditation, observe a pause, a space between the thoughts. Attending to, what is that? That's consciousness attending to consciousness in those moments. The bare knowing the bare knowing. And that's a very powerful thing. To be able to observe consciousness itself as an instrument of experience is a very powerful thing. But even not being able to see that, or even setting that aside for a moment, the emotional aspect is what the Buddha actually spoke about in this sutta. And he talks about, what do you do when you identify joy? What do you do when you identify sadness? What do you do when you identify equanimity? What are some ways to practice with the actual the things that we most often see, right? Those are the juicy parts of the experience, not the subtle parts. Those are the loud parts, right? Actual emotions around them most of the time. So that's where we're going to go with this a bit. But the one thing that I do want to say is, and we'll get into this quite a bit more tomorrow when we get to that part about the emotions. But I want to also just give you a bit of a heads up, which is that this sutta speaks about looking at joy from the perspective of the householder life and joy from the perspective of the renunciate or the monastic life. And I hope that you all don't get discouraged by that or think that somehow you should be getting the message that you should all become monastics, because that's not my intention at all. And actually, interestingly, even the ancient commentators wrote a little something about how they understood those two things. So we're going to frame that in a little bit different way. And it has to do with the focus, actually, and how we allow ourselves to be attending to one kind of focus about our life or to another kind of focus. So we'll get into all of that tomorrow, but I just want to say, you'll see in your handout that we have this dual perspective about that, and really the underlying message there, which again is not going to be too much. There's not going to be too much detail about that in this sutta, but the underlying message there is about wise attention and choosing how we are attending to what we experience. The differentiation between this thing that's been called the householder or the thing that's been called the renunciate. I'll say more tomorrow about it, but basically it's something along the lines of the material is a material focused view versus a principle focused view. So just to wrap it up as I can for this evening, so the first part of this sutta seems like the simplest, and yet it is something that's going to require some practice. And it is because what the Buddha says about each of these sense fields, the inner sense fields and the outer sense fields, is it should be known. It should be known. And to know your lived experience from moment to moment, as our friend with the left foot told us, demonstrated for us, can be quite the practice. Can be quite the practice. We think that we're all, fully here. Of course, I know what's going on. I can get in my car. I can drive to the 7-Eleven. Well, you may be mindfully driving to the 7-Eleven, or you may not. And you can do that investigation for yourself, and you can find out a little bit about what are the conditions that help you actually be present. Be present. So when the Buddha speaks about this kind of knowing, the knowing that's mentioned here is not sati, actually. It presumes mindfulness, actually, but the knowing that is mentioned here is a kind of knowing that is related to insight, actually. And so, let's see, I have it right here. And but mindfulness, again, is necessary if we're going to be able to even experience a thing. So what do I mean by mindfulness when I throw around that term? I mean a heightened awareness of phenomena in the present moment in a receptive, non-judgmental way. And the reason why I say it that way is because quite often I think that there's some confusion between investigation and mindfulness. So mindfulness is the first of the 7 awakening factors. Investigation is the second. They're quite different dynamics. So investigation is much more active. It's much more going to that thing, and that kind of precision that I was talking about, where you can get down to a more granular and a more discerning way of experiencing the thing. But mindfulness is you could say a very different attitude than that. Mindfulness is a very soft, receptive, non-discerning. So if I were to give you an example, when I was on retreat a couple of years back, I was sitting out on the deck and I was seeing the tree on the back, just off the back deck. There's a big pine tree there, off the back deck of the little, it's called a kuti. It was a yurt, actually, that was there on the back 15 of Vihara's land. And seeing the tree, experiencing the presence of the tree, that's mindfulness. Just a not good tree, bad tree, right? Tree I know or I like, or tree with a squirrel, none of those things. Just experience of tree, that is mindfulness. Investigation is what happened next. So it was a very cloudy day, and so the sun was obscured, and then at one point, then the clouds opened up, and it got more sunny suddenly. And then I noticed, look, the shadow of the tree appears. So when the day is very overcast, the tree doesn't have a shadow. But then when the clouds open up, then there's much brighter light, and the tree has a shadow. And so that was investigation. And then I say, right, investigation says, I compare one state to the other state. Investigation says, I notice that sun is required for shadow. I start to connect the dots of the conditions, and I am more engaged in the thing that I'm looking at. So you see the difference there? So what I'm suggesting is that when the Buddha says the 6 inner sense fields should be known, that is, it's not just mindfulness, but it's also a degree of investigation that's required there. So the word that's being used here means known, or sometimes it's also translated Bhante. If you're interested, we can get you a copy of Bhante Sujato, this Australian monk who has done quite a number of sutta translations online. He translates as understood. So you see how that's a little bit different, right, than just the mere presence, knowing the presence of the thing, which is what mindfulness is. Or felt is another way that this Pali word can be described. So that's something to consider. That in order to practice with a thing, you must be present with it. That's the mindfulness piece of it. But in order to understand the thing, in order to really fully know it, then there's a little more investigation that's required. And when we do that, when we become more fully embodied in this sense experience, then the Buddha gives a series of instructions that can help us to learn, just like the little one with the ice cream, how we can begin to make skillful choices, make choices that are about letting go of the dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, or the painfulness, suffering, rather than clinging to it. So that is what I wanted to share this evening. And as I said, tomorrow there'll be a handout with some outline of the sutta, and we can go from there. But what I want to do at this point is thank you for your attention, and if you would like to, we can have some question and answer period. Both the folks online and the folks in person. Then tomorrow we'll lean more into the quiet side of the equation. Maybe we'll have a little Q&A toward the end of the day, but we'll try to have more silence during the main part of the day. Charlie, did you have a question?
Yeah. Is investigation the same thing as concentration?
No.
Different,
yeah. So the Pali word for investigation is Dhammavichaya. It means that vichaya is applying the mind to dhammas, and dhammas here which is, so this word dhamma. If you look it up in the Pali English dictionary, you get about 24, maybe 27 different translations, and one of them is just things, stuff. Would be dhammas, the lower D. So that's what Dhammavichaya is applying the mind to dhammas, to things. That's investigation. That's what I usually translate as investigation. Samadhi is the word for concentration, and concentration requires the vichaya. Actually, that's one of the 5 factors that is said to be required for samadhi. But you could say the distinction is something like this practice that we're going to look at here, and most investigation is a process of discerning individual pieces of experience in sequence. You're looking at this thing, at this thing, at this thing, at this thing, or how this thing arises and persists and then ceases, and how the next thing arises, persists and ceases. As distinct from concentration, which is what I like to call the Teflon. You have to have a little Teflon mind. So concentration says you pick one thing and everything else falls away. You just stay with the one thing and everything else goes to Teflon mind, just slides off. So there, you see, there isn't this kind of parsing and discernment and distinction, and that lack of discernment or discrimination between things is what allows the mind to actually become more settled and more focused. And so then you have this sense of absorption, where eventually the mind will also allow the coarseness of the physicality of whatever you're pointed at to slide off as well. And there's just the mental experience being related to, so mind related to itself.
I wanted to go back to something you said earlier when you were talking about joy and this being physical seclusion, meditation, mental seclusion from defilements and ethics. But then the next step, and I think this is where where I'm a loss for words. Where renunciation is what I was thinking about. Joy through renunciation, and that would be the path of the monastic, as opposed to the joy that the layman. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I will talk a lot about that tomorrow, actually. Okay. So, but it's a good question, and it can be seen that way. But there's the lay life and there's the monastic life, and these are the two. Those are two different streams of practice. But what I'm proposing is that, as the commentators did also, is that can be true, but it can also be that any practitioner can relate to their experience through this lens of joy with a sort of material focus versus joy about the principles. So we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. Yeah. Because I want to say monasticism has its value in sort of turning all of your energy and attention to the path by virtue of sort of setting up the external conditions that so that that's easy to do or it's necessary to do. But that sometimes external conditions are necessary, but then other times it's actually not about that. It's more about, again, the sort of, it's more about the wise attention and how we're applying the attention to the thing itself. So that's where I hope to go with it tomorrow. So we'll see. I'll give you an example tomorrow. I have a very interesting story about that hopefully will make it intuitive. I saw a hand back there.
There's also one.
Some hands. Okay, let's see. Let me take her in the back, and then Anand, you would be next. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Please, yes.
Good to see you in Atlanta. So my question was about your the example that you used with the little shaken ball. So in that metaphor, so from a terms that you understand exactly, the ball itself is your sense door.
Yes.
your hand in this case is the object. And when you put it in the light phenomenon, that light is that temporary
Consciousness.
consciousness.
Exactly. That's eye conscious. It's a moment of eye consciousness.
Is that the same word in how it's used for kind of like they're all over the aggregate consciousness?
Yes, it's vijnana, and so it is the same word, and so you have eye vijnana and ear vijnana, and then you also have mind vijnana, mano vijnana, yeah, mind consciousness.
So mind consciousness is like when we're talking about the five aggregates.
That's
mind
different.
consciousness.
No.
Oh, that's totally different.
No, when consciousness is vijnana as an aggregate is referring to both that stream of the continuity, enough continuity that there's something that can attend to the bodily experience, and the specific moments of activity, you could say, that's sparking the other pieces, right? So the feeling tones, the perceptions, and the sankharas, which is like reactions, responses on top of that. So what I'll do, it's good that this question comes up, and it often does when it comes to the six sense bases, is I brought a, and I'll share it with the folks online also. I brought, I think I would share it with the folks online. I might have to wait. I'll show it to you in a minute. A map of the five aggregates, which shows which aggregates. Here you go, you guys. We'll get it later, but you can see it on the recording maybe now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good right there.
Yeah. And it shows that
you're mirrored.
right. It's backwards. I'll see if I can. I don't have my laptop with me, but I'll see if I can get it to you. But what it shows is that the consciousness aggregate is divided out by the door that it came in, and so is the feeling tone. Then you look at the other parts, and the other parts are associated with the objects. So it intentionally doesn't map exactly. It's just this part is saying that the movements of consciousness are closely related to which door it came in, and so is the feeling tone, because as I said, the feeling tone is very close to the conscious moment, the consciousness's role in the thing. So the aggregates is looking at consciousness as more holistically than the six sense basis. The six sense basis is looking at vijnana as this field, this general field of awareness. And that general field of awareness can take any one of the other things, as well as itself. So that's why it's called vijnana. And then you have mano vijnana, and you have eye vijnana, and nose vijnana, and so on. You can think about it. Okay, Eva. Thanks. Anand. Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. I think I have two questions, but first question is, the mindfulness and investigation, right? So when we are mindful, when something comes into mind, as you investigate, you will lose the mindfulness, right? Always, when I try to investigate, then I get lost in that, right? As I'm just investigating. Is that the true way of understanding? Mind. You cannot as we are investigating, we are temporarily we are out of mindfulness.
No, I think, Anand, as I was saying, you have to have mindfulness coincident with investigation, because you can't investigate a thing that you're not mindful of, that you're not actually present for. So you can think of mindfulness as just as like presence. If you can be present with the thing, then that's mindfulness. And when you investigate it, when you say you get lost in the investigation, that's actually moving on to other things. So then what's happening there is something like you've gone, you have what's called papancha. So you have, right, you have sort of responses and reactions that build on top of one another, right? It's said to be kind of like the plantain tree, right, where the thoughts sort of wrap around each other, and it makes it seem more solid. And because it makes it seem more solid, then it's easier for us to get sort of caught up in that. But you have to have, you must have mindfulness of the thing in order to be able to do the investigation.
Yep. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The second one is, I was thinking, the investigation depends on the level of activeness of the mind. Like if the mind is very active, you do more investigation, and if the mind is dull, or less active, you're investigating less. Or is it depends on the how active is the mind? Or I just always try to see how the investigation works, right?
Yes, it's good. I'm appreciating the inquiry that you're doing, right? You're doing the investigation of the investigation. So the investigation is one of the three factors that are stimulating. So when we look at the 7 factors of awakening, you have mindfulness. Mindfulness is said to be useful all the time, no matter the state of the mind. And then you have the first 3 factors after mindfulness are said to be the stimulating factors. So you have investigation of dhammas, energy or effort, and joy. And those things are always going to be creating more energy in the mind. So, and then you have the 3 stimulating factors, just to complete the whole picture. You have tranquility, samadhi or absorption or concentration that we were talking about a moment ago, and equanimity, which we're going to talk about quite a bit at the end of, here on Sunday. So it could go either way, in other words. So it could be that the mind is feeling very energized and very stimulated, and therefore there's an interest and lots of energy to burn for investigation. However, investigation is also bringing energy back into the mind. So that tends to cause more agitation. It makes it very hard to move toward either a settling and more insight, or a concentration, either one of those two, because that is a cycle which will tend to sort of spin the energy out beyond where you can actually sit still and see anything. Yeah. So both things are happening though. So it could be that you have enough energy and you're feeling like, okay, I need to put a little bit of this to work. But when you do that, then you need to balance that with something else, right? With maybe a body that's already quite tranquil. If you've been sitting for a long time, then the body will sort of anchor that and, right, keep it from spinning out too far.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Beth.
Yeah, I'm trying to grapple with thought as a sense-gate. And I get the feeling that this thought is not the same thing as like memory or some abstract thought. Like I'm seeing the white flower up there. That's in identifying it. That's thought as a sense-gate. But what if I say, oh, that reminds me of the corsage I had on my prom and that goofy guy that I had the date with,
Right.
Right. So I'm thinking that's not one of the sense-gates, that's some kind of other thing, like an aggregate, like that's perception and.
Right. Don't
Okay.
try to cross map the aggregates and the sense bases
Okay.
at this point, because I think again that that only applies to certain of the aggregates, that they can be lined up well in that way. And the other clarification that I want to make is thought is not a sense-based, thought is a sensation that is happening in the sense base of awareness or consciousness or mind. So it asks us to think about consciousness as, you could say, as consciousness like a field, like a field in space, and there's some little whoosh, there's some little bit of light that happens, or heat, or some kind of energy push. And every time, that's the thought, that piece of it. The space in which that's happening is the consciousness, is the vijnana, is mind as a sense organ. So it requires, right? So you can, another way to think about it is, if you thought, is it another metaphor that's used, and sometimes this helps, you just keep throwing metaphors out until one of them feels like it resonates with what you see or what you experience. So another way to think about it is, if consciousness is like an ocean, right? Then each thought is like a wave on that ocean. It's a particular energetic with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then that energy is dissipated, and maybe some of it's left, and then there's some for the next wave.
So it's not important what the content is.
Exactly. It's not a content view. It's a totally processed view. Good point. Right. So we're going to talk about content piece of it tomorrow, but what we're talking about right now, when we look at contact and the individual gates or fields and their objects, that's a process view, that's a sort of mechanism view of the experience. Then tomorrow we'll talk more about what's the content that comes out of that, and then what are you doing with the content that comes out of that. Great. Beautiful. It's a good distinction to make. Okay, so I think that we are at the end of our time for this evening. So so the request for this evening is to know your sense experiences. Stay close to your sense experience and observe what's happening with the body. How is the mind attending to that? And then what are some of the reactions? What are some of the feelings that come out of that? And as then you'll have some content to relate to for tomorrow. And then we'll go from there. And if you want to do more sitting, by all means. More sitting. And do try to get some rest. See you tomorrow morning at 9. So many blessings to you for the evening. Again, dedicating merit to all of the people and the feelings and the situations and the beings who are in the Metta Bowl, and the chat there for the Metta Bowl, your hearts and minds right now. May all beings be at peace. Good night, everyone.
Charlie, do you want to collect these?
Why don't we put them, if your papers, just lay them on the counter out there, you'll see there's a stack of them, and just